Hey folks, it's Cement once again, and welcome back to another review of another Jean-Claude Van Damme film, and this is the critically acclaimed JCVD. I know it's a Blockbuster exclusive. I got this used way back in the day, and really no features. It says theatrical, French, and English versions of the film, Spanish subtitles, English subtitles, trailer. That's it. But I know this got a lot of good praise. Hell, I remember when Rotten Tomatoes, or might have been another website, they asked actors certain things. I know Nicolas Cage was a fan of Van Damme's acting. It's on YouTube, actually, where Nicolas Cage talks about Van Damme's performance in this. I thought that was really cool. And a lot of good notes. Time Magazine, he deserves not a black belt, but an Oscar. Entertainment Weekly, funny, nimble, knowing, gracious, and kick-ass. Boston Globe, forces you to consider the star in a whole new light. Variety, Van Damme is back. Not much of a comeback, but he's made a couple ones I like, which I'll talk about. For example, Six Bullets, watching that again, I didn't mind. Same with the Shepherd Border Patrol, but there's others that's like, yeah. JCVD, though, when you go into this film, it's not an action film. It's not meant to be an action film, but at times it's a pretty funny, touching flick. Once again, Van Damme did a great job acting-wise. You can say, well, he's playing himself, but he did a really good job with it. I mean, I thought the director... I can't pronounce the director's name, so I'm not going to try because I'll butcher it. I thought the director did a pretty decent job with this flick. I mean, you have this action scene, which is a pretty damn good action scene because it's all in one shot, and there's gunfire, there's explosions, there's kicks, there's knives, there's someone shooting a damn flamethrower. All this stuff happening in one scene while that song that you hear in the trailer, "Come on, hard times," which I don't mind that song. And then you find out it's all part of a movie, and Van Damme's complaining, I can't, I'm 50-some years old, I can't do shots that long, and the director's complaining, saying he thinks we're making Citizen Kane. And Van Damme, it's not precisely his life that they take you, but for example, he's in a custody with his kid. I don't ever remember him being in a custody battle with his daughter. But you have a judge complaining about the violence in his films. I like that Van Damme's in court. Yeah, again. Just keep talking. But the reason is a lawyer's complaining about this. She wants to be with her mother and this and that. One leads to another. Van Damme goes in this post office, and there's gunshots, and there's a hostage situation, and ransom, and this is kind of done sort of in a Pulp Fiction way, where what you see at the beginning, not the very first scene, but the scene I'm talking about, it'll show that, then it'll show what happened before that led up to that. So it's not in 100% chronological order. I guess that's what I meant by Pulp Fiction. Like, Pulp Fiction is not in 100% chronological order. Neither is this, which I was fine with. One weird thing is when his daughter goes on the stand, she talks about how her kid, not her kids, she's a little girl, she doesn't have kids. The other kids at school make fun of her when dad is on TV, and I go, really? Would that be the case? Would people really make fun? Of course, how many people make fun of Jean-Claude Van Damme anyway? Same with some of these other action stars, so maybe I do believe that. Maybe that does make sense. But you get a little bit of input of making movies, Van Damme talking with his agent about, oh, they sent me to Bulgaria in a fucking factory. And later on in the film, of course, you have, okay, I'll tape the movie. Oh, they got Steven Seagal. Seagal? Yeah, he's willing to cut off his ponytail. And Van Damme's like, oh. So you get some nice funny bits. Some really nice bits of acting where Van Damme's trying to get this money. They won't give it to him. He doesn't know what's going on. He's like, I want my fucking money! And then he apologizes, I'm sorry, I'm just having this rough time. And finds out he walked into a robbery. Some of the nice bits, one of the robbers is actually a big fan of Jean-Claude Van Damme and starts talking with him about John Woo. He says, yeah, hard target, but you never used it again, did he? And Van Damme goes, well, he did Face Off. And then the other guy goes, the robber goes, well, when you see wind talkers, you'll know that there's justice. So he's pretty much talking shit about wind talkers, which I agree with. I hate wind talkers, so I thought that was pretty funny. Also, he wants Van Damme to do this bit where he kicks a cigarette out of a guy's mouth. So he gets one of the hostages, puts a cigarette, says, stay there. Come on, Van Damme, you gotta do it. And Van Damme does it. So then the other guy, the robber, tries, and he accidentally hits the guy in the face. And again, it has that sort of storytelling where it gives a little bit of what's happening during the robbery, then a little bit of a scene that happened before the robbery took place. Then it goes back to during the robbery, then another scene before the robbery. So some people may be put off with that kind of storytelling, but again, watching flicks like Pulp Fiction, I was fine with that. It didn't bother me. It might bother some, but it didn't bother me. I also like the acting scene where the police think it's Van Damme doing it, and that the robbers then make Van Damme say this stuff, and the cops get Van Damme's mom. I don't know if it's his real mom and dad that they got. Maybe, I don't know. Because there's no features or commentary on this. It could be. But I like when Van Damme is trying to talk with his crying mom and trying to calm her down, and the robbers tell him to knock it off, and Van Damme gets pissed. I like that. You know, he doesn't want his mom crying. So I like that a little bit. And they're able to get a hostage to be let go. And it's around that time where you get Van Damme's monologue, which is a great monologue. I'm sure you can find it here on YouTube. Where they do this weird thing where he's sitting down and the wall sort of comes up, like, you know it's a set now. There's a light back here. And Van Damme pretty much talks into the camera where pretty much bearing out his soul. That's really the best way to put it. Just, he knows he screwed up, and he knows that he has failed, and he also knows how people think of him, and think of him as a joke. Again, like I said, I couldn't do any justice if I tried to replicate it, so just see it for yourself. I thought Van Damme, I think even Roger Ebert, I remember a review he did where he goes, he says worse stuff about himself than any critic would say. But it's one of those things that I always forget that Van Damme does have bipolar disorder. So I have to wonder if that's why throughout, I don't know about anything about bipolar disorder. I will be honest, I don't know jack or shit about it. I'm sure there's a lot of people with bipolar who still didn't do drugs and didn't do this and that. So I don't know how bipolar works. If someone knows how bipolar works, I'm not talking about just I could just read it from Wikipedia. I'm talking about if anyone who knows anyone with bipolar, how it works. They can let me know. Anyone who suffers bipolar can let me know. But I'm just wondering if that's maybe some of the reasons how Van Damme has had a rocky personal professional life. I don't know. But he doesn't I don't think he mentions that in this film. He doesn't mention it, but I just remember reading up that he does have bipolar. But it's a great monologue. He helps this one kid out, gets shot in the arm. One robber shoots the other, and then another one of the robbers gets shot by cops, and the third one has him. I do enjoy this bit. I thought this was pretty clever, where Van Damme imagines what he wants to do, where he elbows and he roundhouse kicks the robber, and the crowd is cheering, and Van Damme is raising he's giving high fives to the cops, to the SWAT team members. They're like, yeah, give me five. And he does like, bah, bah. That's what he imagines, because that's how it worked in a movie. But then in real life, he just elbows it and then quickly goes to the ground. The cops quickly get the bad guy. And then even then, Van Damme is arrested for extortion. Even though he had no choice, they still arrest him. And even when the cop says, well, that's bullshit. And the last scene is Van Damme teaching some folks in prison a little bit about martial arts. And he talks to his mom, and then his daughter, who, like I said before, has said, oh, the kids make fun of me when they see my dad on TV. She has gone up to see her dad, and Van Damme has a nice reaction, looks at her, and hits the phone on his head. And then I thought this was just a really good Van Damme flick. I wish, if you think about it, this didn't really lead to much. I mean, this got so much critical acclaim, even though I don't know what the rating is on IMDb. I should look it up. But it got some acclaim from critics, and it didn't mean anything, because he was doing shit like Universal Soldier Regeneration. And now he's doing crap like Welcome to the Jungle, which he was the only good thing in that. The rest of the movie was crap. It is 7.2, so a respectable rating. I'm fine with that. If not for nothing else, because it's not like the robbery portion of the flick is that exciting. And the way the film looks, it's that sort of gray. It just looks gray. You can tell. It just looks like this close to a black and white movie. But I was fine with it. It didn't bother me in that. When I watched Assassination Games and looked at how it's piss yellow and fucking boring, and even Van Damme didn't give much of a performance because he didn't have much to work with, that's a shitty film. But this, for Van Damme's monologue, Van Damme's performance, some nice fun bits, inside jokes like his rivalry with Steven Seagal. I like the guy who played the robber who was a fan of Van Damme from beginning to end. I like the mentions of John Woo, and nice action beat at the beginning of the film. That's a nice sequence. Just really enjoy this film. I thought this was a nice touch. But again, it's sad because it led to nothing. It didn't lead them doing more. This was 2008. It's 7 years later, and where is Van Damme? Still stuck in straight-to-DVD land. And I've heard a lot of bad shit about that new film, Pound of Flesh. That there's body doubles, and it's really boring, and just sounded lame when from all the reviews I've heard of it. I'm like, wow. Even getting into a theatrical film like Expendables 2 didn't mean jack shit for his career. Oh, he's in a Kickboxer remake as a teacher. Fucking grade A bullshit. But anyway, it's sad. Because he's done some good direct-to-video stuff. I like this film. I like this film. I like this film, which was pretty much straight to DVD. But anyway, JCVD, really enjoyed it. Great. Once again, people who say he can't act and he can't do anything, they should watch films like this. Great role from, solid movie. But anyway, I remember when I first saw it, I was just blown away by some of these films. I'm like, yeah, the guy can act. which is more than I can say for Steven Seagal. I like Seagal's early work, but you're never going to have a Steven Seagal film get this kind of review. I'm sorry. So Steven Seagal can. Van Damme has tried to bury the hatchet with Steven Seagal. Don't believe me? Look at the. There's an interview he did with Expendables 2 where he talks about Steven Seagal, and a guy's laughing about his weight, and Van Damme says, no, 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 no. And Van Damme's trying to bury the hatchet. Seagal doesn't give a fuck. And I think that's one of the things about Van Damme is that he's imperfect, he fucks up, but I see him trying. I don't see Steven Seagal trying. But Van Damme tries at times to be humble. Like everyone, we fail at times, but I see Van Damme trying. I do see Van Damme trying. And that's more than I can say for a lot of people. I think that's why I still really enjoy Van Damme. But anyway, thanks for watching. Take care, and we will see you in the next review. Later.